Hi there. I'm Crucial Drive, a runner of Afterimage, which is a 2023 Metrovania developed by Oregon Shanghai and published by Maximum Entertainment. And this speedrun I'll be giving an in-depth overview of is for a category known as Any Percent, which aims to achieve one of the 10 different endings of the game in the fastest manner possible. Yes, I said 10 endings. You heard me right. This game is one of the largest Metrovanias ever made, taking in large part its inspiration from the Castlevania Metrovanias conceived by Koji Igarashi, as well as from more recently highly regarded Metrovanias such as Hollow Knight and Ori of the Blind Forest. But yeah, this game is very broad in scope. Any percent aims to achieve the homecoming ending, which is considered to be the bad ending for the main character Renee, but bad ending does not in any way remove from the amount of cool things shown in this very fast-paced run, especially when done under the restricted rule set, which I think allows for a showcasing of all of the cool things this game engine has to offer. So as we get started here, you'll notice that we can select between two different difficulties. Normal is basically easy, that was added in December 2023 update. Advanced is what most runners run on, and that was the difficulty that the game initially released on. Right away, we can see that Renee, our main character here, possesses the dash from the get-go. It has no iframes though. It just allows for her to move with a quick burst of speed in the direction that you're facing. And it's going to be used not just for moving throughout the run, but also for canceling out of actions because it offers a tremendous amount of cancel options from dash itself. But as we make our way through the first area of the game known as Rubywood Desert, there's going to be a boss fight coming up against a guy called Lush Wolf, and he'll go down really, really quickly thanks to a technique known as crouch cancel attacks. Basically what this is doing a standing attack with a very fast weapon class such as the sword, which was what we used here, or the scythe, which is what we'll be using later. And it allows for doing that into a crouch, into a standing attack, and then keep doing it over and over to allow for extremely fast DPS. And this is one of the best ways to inflict DPS in the restricted rule set of this speed game. But yeah, the second part of Lush Wolf involved an intentional death because it is scripted. And from there, we move forward into the further portion of Rubywood Desert. And what we're going to be doing soon here is something that will be a recurring theme throughout this run, is we're going to be grabbing a weapon upgrade. This is to the Wind Scythe. I already mentioned before that Wind Scythe also allows for performing the crouch cancel attacks. The thing about the Scythe weapon class is that not only does it possess more range, but also does more damage per hit than typically swords would do. So it's just basically a straight DPS up, as long as we can still make use of the crouch cancel attacks in a swift manner. But from here, we engage with this NPC that we've actually spoken to already in this run before. She's going to show up again later on in the run, related to the story events. But for the time being, along we continue. And another thing worth mentioning, this game has very cool, not just movement in general, but also just the amount of control over your character that you're allowed to have. Basically, you can suspend yourself in the air for a brief amount of time by using the jump attack. And the jump attack, suspending you in the air for a brief amount of time, can only produce once per jump. However, if you do an air dash or a double jump, or any sort of action that quote unquote resets your air suspension using said jump attack, then you're able to perform that again. And we leverage that in a technique known as long jumping, which is going to be used later on for a sequence break. We've actually already done one in this run already, but it comes up quite a number of times. One thing we just did here was destroyed a rock known as Dew, and this gave currency that we're going to be used for buying fast travel consumables known as resting potions for later on in the run. Those are going to be purchased pretty shortly from here, but not right away since we haven't gotten to the area where we can purchase them from. But for the time being, we navigate further to the right along this area known as Rainbow Plains with a quick talent point menu there. And talent points just offer more damage for your character pretty much as far as the context of this run is concerned. But here we engage with our first boss, our first true boss of the run. We've already fought a boss, but nonetheless, this boss is triple question marks, a rather mysterious moniker, but I can assure your identity will be known in due time. But this boss is pretty long to take down, especially with the weaponry that we have available. But the idea here is to use crouch cancel attacks, dodging your attacks along the way. We purposely take damage from this pillared attack because it allows us to perform a bunch of DPS during that time frame. And from there, we just finish her off nice and elegantly. She disappears, but that won't be the last we see of her. But until then, we go forward into the hub town of the run, hub town of the game for that matter, known as Resting Town. And you'll notice that the name of the area is obscured by hieroglyphs. These glyphs are basically to cover the real name of the area until you speak with the designated NPC or uncover the echo by recovering your character's memories, because Renee is an amnesiac. But here we're going to buy 2 of those consumable fast travel I mentioned before. Those are the resting potions we were able to purchase by using the currency that we've accumulated so far. Not very much currency we have, but in any percent, since it's such a quick category, we don't actually need very much money to do anything. But now we descend into the next area of the game known as Resting Path. And Resting Path has only one real goal in it, and it's to obtain the Slide ability. Slide is a progression ability in this game's early progression, and it's required to move forward in the run because there are certain areas that are unreachable without being able to travel low along the ground, which is what Slide allows us to do. But more than that, Slide will allow us to actually move at nearly double the speed by making use of a movement technique known as dash sliding. And we're going to see how that looks pretty soon here. But until then, we're making a detour up here to grab another weapon upgrade. This is the Bronze Scythe. And we'll be doing this another time later in the run. It won't be the last we do of this kind of thing. But basically, the idea is if there's ever a weapon upgrade available in a new area you travel to in a run, that weapon upgrade is going to be better suited for enemies in that area than the one you previously had. Now, the thing is, you have to consider whether it's worth the time cost to grab that extra weapon, because it might be more time than it actually provides as time reduction by increased DPS, right? But for the Bronze Scythe, it helps a lot for reducing the amount of time of this next mini boss fight that is guarding the slide progression ability. So it's actually worth going out of our way to get it and equip it. And we're going to be doing this again with another scythe upgrade later on that we'll actually be using for the rest of the run once we get it. But for now, you'll notice that the enemies that we've encountered in Resting Path so far all have red icons above them. This is to say that they're much higher level than us. A recurring theme of this game when you're speedrunning it, and it's kind of a callback to what I mentioned about this being one of the largest Metrovanias ever made, but it's the fact that the speedrun is very fast, the game is very large, so we're going to be very underleveled with a lot of these areas, and the level gap will be pretty broadly established shortly. It's not quite so broad just yet, but in the meantime, here's the mini boss fight against the Prison Bone Punisher enemies. Prison Bone Punisher was there, and then there's Prison Bone Archer coming up next. They all spawn at a certain time, so if you beat them quickly enough, then you get a nice chance to let your hands rest from the crouch canceling, but they went down very cleanly. You can see that the second one, once defeated, dropped the slide progression ability, which we now possess, and now off we go. We're going to be moving very, very fast from here. This is the dash slide technique. You're basically using the dash that we started with, and you're canceling it into slide, which is the same input, but done while crouching. And by doing that, you're moving much, much faster than just chaining dashes together, because if you don't do this, you're actually not able to cancel dash into itself. You have to link it, which requires some degree of precision in timing, but that's to say that it's much better to do dash sliding than it is to plain dash the whole 30-minute run. But yeah, while I was talking, we now enter the next area called Field of Geo. And Field of Geo was locked behind slide. We actually already traveled underneath this, but you'll see another thing that we travel underneath that required slide. And Field of Geo is actually one of the first scary areas we come across. All these enemies do quite a bit of damage to us, but on normal mode, which is the difficulty that we're on right now, the damage is greatly reduced. So fortunately, it shouldn't be too bad. But the idea with the early part of Field of Geo is you want to make the best cycles that you can, because all these enemies move on set intervals, and the intervals are relatively known quantities. So as long as you're able to make the cycles, then you can save lots of time. But you saw for this run that we're looking at here, it took a lot of time to get past the bomb throwers, and that was because I did not make the most out of the cycle that I had, which is a pretty tight cycle to hit. So unfortunately, it can snowball itself and cost a lot of time. But regardless, make it through the first part of Field of Geo smoothly enough. The next thing we're going to be doing here involves the long jump technique that I hinted at back when we were in Rainbow Plains earlier in the run. And this is basically going to be using all of our air actions to move as long of a distance as possible in the air. So there's the air attack, and then the dash, and then the air attack. Basically allows us to get the maximum air suspension while moving as far horizontally as we can. And we use that to grab our next weapon upgrade out of sequence. This weapon upgrade is known as the Blackwood Blade. And the Blade is another weapon class that we haven't encountered yet in this run so far. The Blade is very, very powerful in terms of its movement capabilities, but also with its DPS capabilities. Basically, the Blade has an air attack that hits twice, and it hits for the same damage that it would hit if it hit once for that same air attack. So that's to say you're hitting basically for 2 times the damage you would at that weapon strength level otherwise. So it's highly, highly worth picking it up for this next boss here. But we're now in Emerald Falls, and the next boss we'll be fighting, specifically why we even got this Blackwood Blade out of sequence in the first place, is guarding the double jump ability. And double jump is going to open up the game tremendously. So it's highly, highly worth having the necessary weaponry to be able to beat this boss cleanly. This boss is known as Loss. And Loss is a pretty scripted fight. Basically, as long as you get enough hits into it using the jumping attack of the blade, then we actually skip a number of its attacks in the first phase, and we're able to go straight into the second phase where we just have to deflect the feathers here, and it goes down really, really fast. On normal difficulty, it's much easier to do so. On advanced difficulty, there's a couple more attacks it typically would do in its first phase before it goes into the second phase, but ideally you want it to get into the second phase as soon as possible so that you can get the deflections with the feathers and connect the Blackwood Blade's air attacks at the same time. Because when you deflect projectiles in this game, you're still dealing your attack damage back because it's based on your attack damage value. But now we're making a big drop down into the next area now that we have double jump, and double jump is packaged along with dive kick, which I so love in this game because it allows us to actually bounce off of enemies and reset our air actions. So we're going to be leveraging that for a sequence break later on as well. But we're now in the columns. The columns is mostly an intermediary area. We don't really have any matter of business directly in the columns, but we're going to be grabbing this confluence. It's that tree that we tapped. It's basically a save point. And we're going to be using that to come back to, because in order to come back to a save point by means of fast travel, you have to have used that confluence as a save point initially. So now the drop down is made into another intermediate area known as Ashen Canyon. A much shorter stint we make in Ashen Canyon than in the columns, but still it's the connecting traversal towards the area of true concern, which is Town of the Exiled. Town of the Exiled is very scary to be in at this level because we're level 8, and Town of the Exiled enemies tend to be around level 30-ish. So things start to get pretty scary from here. And that's especially going to be the case with the next boss, which is why we just grabbed this next scythe upgrade known as Scythe of Torture. It's a massive increase in DPS compared to the Bronze Scythe, and even compared to the Blackwood Blade. So this boss is known as Aus. For a while, this was a big choke point in this run, especially in the advanced difficulty. But now that we have a means of grabbing a talent point that actually allows for an extra 5 HP, that 5 HP actually prevents us from getting one shot by her attacks, which tends to be RNG typically. You can get really bad attack patterns, and then on top of that, the damage roll for these attack patterns can sometimes do enough damage to one-shot you. But this extra plus 5 HP talent point actually prevents it from one-shotting you no matter what. We got really good attack patterns in the second phase, so thankfully most of what I said didn't even matter to begin with. And that's just possible if you get good enough crouch canceled attacks, and if you reposition yourself enough based on the attacks that she deals to you. Now, why do we fight Aus in the first place? Why do we go all the way down to Town of the Exiled for that? Well. we needed to pick up the Afterimage, which is Afterimage is basically another way of saying progression ability. That's what this game calls progression abilities. We need to pick up the Afterimage for the Clammy Whistle. And the Clammy Whistle basically will allow us to travel the overworld that we're going to be coming across to the right here. But a boss is guarding that overworld, and this is Crystallized Wolf. Not the worst boss in the world by any means, but we do have to focus up for this one because there's a deflection that we need to hit to increase the damage massively, which it so was. So it was an excellent fight. And we speak with the... Ooh, pardon me. We speak with the Monterey, and the Monterey will take us to the overworld, and that's what we currently see. This overworld is basically going to allow us access to areas that will allow us to progress even further into the game. We're grabbing out of the way slightly another enhancement material that will allow us to use our existing currency to improve the power of our current weaponry. And here we're making a quick stop at this island known as Teardrop. Basically, there's a switch that we need to hit, and it'll open up the gate to the rest of the overworld. But in the meantime, I did mention that this run will be targeting the homecoming ending. Now, why is that in particular? Why are we even going for this so-called bad ending? It so happens that this bad ending basically has only one final boss, and the conditions to reach this final boss are literally nothing. You just have to have the requisite progression abilities to make it there. And the one thing that we're looking for to make it there is swim. Basically, the whole goal of this game is teaching the main character, Renee, how to swim, because swimming in this game is genuinely very harmful to the body. So, yeah, we just need to find swim, and boom, we're good to go. But there's a lot of steps required in order to do that, which is what we're accomplishing right now. We're going to a very, very dangerous area right now, known as Holy Grounds, and the enemies in this area are much higher than our current level. This is like a level 50-ish area, and we're level 9 right now, so very scary stuff here, but the traversal is all planned out, and we have a sequence break coming up that allows us to bounce off this dragonfly and make the traversal in this area much, much faster than it would be otherwise. And then to the left here is another enhancement material that we're going to be using on the next scythe upgrade that we'll be getting here soon. But until then, some more very scary traversal through these dragonflies. It might not look it, but these dragonflies are quite the menace. On advanced, they can easily one-shot. On normal, which is the difficulty we're on right now, in our current position, they probably would one-shot or two-shot, but either way, you cannot take them for granted. So here's another sequence break to bounce up this dragonfly and quickly collect the final scythe upgrade that we'll be getting for this run, known as the Iron Scythe, which improves our health pool, our main weapon attack, and is a straight damage upgrade over the previous scythe that we had. Iron Scythe is going to be very, very useful for the rest of this run. Speedrunner mainstay. At least for any percent in the other shorter categories. But the rest of this traversal in Holy Grounds is basically getting to the central portion known as Grand Archives. And there we will tap the Confluence so that we'll come back to Holy Grounds later, because we're not actually going to be doing anything else in Holy Grounds for now. The main goal we had for coming here early was to get the Iron Scythe I mentioned before, as well as get some additional level ups from the echoes that are available here, which we haven't come across them yet, but they're coming up shortly. Now, the thing that you'll notice we're doing here, why are we able to dash through these enemies? I thought, Cruci Drive, you said that iframes are not given by the dash. Well, it turns out if you move fast enough in this game, some enemies will not have had their collision loaded in yet, and thus they won't deal contact damage to you. Because normally, almost everything in this game is supposed to deal contact damage, but for some reason, if you move fast enough on certain enemies, then you'll just be able to dash right through them without taking any damage. So it's really nice for those enemies in Holy Grounds. Saves a bunch of time to hit them all, but it's very scary to do it. Because if you mess up once, if you make a little bit of a hesitation in your dash sliding, then you can easily get one shot or two shot. But yeah, we make our last descent there to unlock the switch that opens up the shortcut from the Confluence that we tapped from before, the save point that we tapped from before. And we're all done with Holy Grounds for now. We're going to come back to it later, though. The next thing that we're going to do is we're going to go to Whispering Forest. And there's a boss that's guarding the next progression ability called Wall Jump. And strictly speaking, you don't need Wall Jump to beat the game, or at least to get the homecoming ending that we're achieving in any percent. But Wall Jump saves a lot of time, and it turns out it's worth getting anyway. You technically could do without it, just with the double jump and dive kick by sequence breaking to bounce off of enemies, but that's a bit of a pain, and it honestly does not even save that much time, if any at all. It still seems faster to just get wall jump and use that as the means of traversal for the late game. And basically, once we get wall jump, the last thing that we'll need to do is get swim, and that would be pretty much it. There's a sequence break that was discovered by myself that we implement nowadays for Whispering Forest, which is the area that we're in. And this sequence break involves a very, very precise long jump, and it saves a lot of time if you get it first try. It saves upwards 30 seconds or so. I didn't go for it in this run because this was a run that was before that was discovered. But ever since it's been discovered, the times for this category have been greatly reduced. It's pretty impressive to see. Another fellow runner, Robbo, has been incorporating the sequence break in Whispering Forest to great success. I've been incorporating it in the Essential because that was the category I was running at the time I had found it. But regardless, it's really, really good to have on hand because it saves so much time, especially with getting around some of these peskier enemies in Whispering Forest. But enough with that. Now we fight this boss known as Failure. And this is the boss that guards the wall jump progression ability. I'm not joking about this name. Truly, the name of this boss is indeed Failure. Of course, respectfully and affectionately, Failure. But Failure goes down pretty quickly. We grab the Agile Claw, which is the wall jump, and we make use of it pretty much right away, especially to dodge that octopus. What a pain it is. And now we navigate up with our newly acquired progression ability. Oops. Yeah, there's a little bit of a skip there that you can do by going over the cutscene trigger, but I messed it up there. But regardless, we now talk to this NPC that opens up the portal to the next area called Forest Forgone. And that's where we'll have kind of a face-off with the NPC that we've encountered from much, much earlier into this run. In fact, at the very beginning of this run. The name of that NPC is known as 42. Basically, she is trying to protect us from the dangers of this world. That's a decent way to sum it up for now. But we're not actually gonna be fighting 42. We're gonna be fighting a monster trapped within her known as the Unstoppable Devil. And this fight is very, very, very interesting. If you kill her fast enough, or at least so we think, if you kill her fast enough, then she basically does not have a chance to do an Ice Rain attack that wastes a ton of time. It wastes like 8 seconds or so. So hopefully that's achieved in this run. It's not the easiest. The ideal way to make her not do it is to kill her fast. We've also found that standing at a certain spacing can have a higher chance of her not doing it. In this run, it looks like we didn't have her do it, so that's excellent. That saves a tremendous amount of time. As I mentioned, it can be anywhere between 6 to 8 seconds. And from there, we go throughout the rest of Forest Forgone. And the next area after this is Silent Coast. I failed to mention it until now, but Whispering Forest, Forest Forgone, and Silent Coast are 3 of the hardest areas to learn in any percent. And it doesn't get any easier from here. Like, after this, it's going to be the Valo fight. Like, after we finish the remainder of Silent Coast and Forest Forgone, etc. It's going to be the Valo fight, which is generally one of the hardest fights to learn in this whole game. I'm not even talking about just any percent. Like, there's not really that many bosses in this game that are as hard to learn as Valo. But Valo is also one of the most fun bosses to fight, in my opinion. So every time, just figuring out ways to save the smallest increments of time in terms of DPS, in terms of dodging and landing punishes on her, it's always so satisfying. But now here we are in Silent Coast. Silent Coast has these killer little bunnies and these flying bunnies that try to dive at you. It's really fun and engaging and interesting. But Silent Coast also has an interesting quirk about it, which is this guy known as Ian. And Ian basically manages a boat. And we need this boat to get across the Misty Waters to an area called Field of Hydro, which is across the Misty Waters. And that's where our mentor currently resides. The whole goal right now is to reunite with our mentor, right? The issue is that Ian sometimes does not show up which means that we can't actually take the boat across to get to Field of Hydro, or so we thought, the speedrunners. Now, it wasn't until recently that it was discovered by Tateha Belmondo while we fight this boss. Honestly, this boss doesn't have much to talk about to begin with. Probably the easiest boss in the run, at this point in the run at least. Does only a couple of attacks if you fight it right, and the rest is history. But basically what was found by Tateha Belmondo is that if you open the map at some point after fighting the Runic Guardian boss, then Ian will appear without fail, meaning there will be no risk of your run losing a minute and a half due to being soft locked from getting across the Misty Waters. Because we need this boat cutscene to play out with Ian. Otherwise, we can't actually make it across. And if it doesn't play out, you have to quit back to main menu, reopen your save file, and typically the last time you will have saved is at the confluence that's in Silent Coast, which we did make use of in this run. And you have to retraverse from that confluence back to the boat dock. And that typically in total takes around a minute and a half, which is brutal in any percent. A minute and a half is your chance at getting PB pace or world record pace. It's over. Highly likely to be over. But with this new workaround found by Tateha Belmondo by opening the map, it's guaranteed, at least as far as we can tell. We haven't had any noted occurrence of this not working. But as far as we can tell, it allows for Ian to always appear without fail. But yeah, now we've made it across the Misty Waters. The boat ride is basically just a loading screen. No joke. But anyway, we're now in Field of Hydro. Mission accomplished. It is here that we will now acquire Swim. And funny enough, I mentioned that our whole goal here was actually to reunite with our mentor. We're not even going to speak with our mentor. We don't really care about her anymore. Renee actually realizes that, for any percent, we don't really care about our mentor. Just give me the swim ability. Let me get out of here. So Eros just gets completely shunned. I deeply apologize, but we have to make this run as fast as possible. We don't have time to talk with Eros. Unfortunately, Eros just talks way too much. So and that's not even the only reason we don't talk to her. But regardless, now we make our way back to Holy Grounds, and here's where we fight the boss known as Valo. I've already hyped her up to this point. Valo is my favorite boss to fight in this game. Basically, Valo guards the way to an area known as Sunken Sanctum, and Sunken Sanctum contains an area known as God's Hall, and that is where we need to perform the final sort of things needed to get an ending cutscene for any percent. In this case, the homecoming ending. So Valo is basically the ultimate gatekeeper right now. And the whole thing with this Valo fight is that she switches between doing enhanced attacks and regular attacks. The regular attacks are distinguished by not having a yellow flash. Enhanced attacks usually have a yellow flash that's consumed before she goes in the attack, and they do like more damage or have like more attack patterns. And now we're in the second phase. Basically, after you deplete her health bar in the first phase, she gets all of her health back. But in the second phase, she increases her defense greatly, but she also does damage over time to herself. So in this way, you can actually kind of play a war of attrition on her. You don't actually need to fight with her face to face. But in the speed run, we still want to deal damage to her because it will still speed up the process of defeating her. And it's nice because the fact that her attacks are consistently enhanced versions in phase 2 means that you actually get more opportunities to deal damage to her, because the enhanced attacks kind of have more recovery time that allow you to punish and deal damage to her. But now that we've defeated her, you still have to dodge just one final attack in one of the corners. Otherwise, this attack one-shots, and it's just a funny little troll knowledge check, I guess. But dropped from Valo is the Scorching Judgment Greatsword. We're using this for basically only the final boss of this category, Guider, and it just allows for some more comfortable dodging, as well as technically some moments where you can deal damage to Guider where ordinarily without the Greatsword you wouldn't be able to do it. And this is due to the Greatsword having a weapon skill known as Iron Bastion, which is a parry. And the parry basically reduces the damage you would have taken otherwise, while also dealing some damage in retaliation. The thing about Iron Bastion, this parry, is that since you still take damage, you have to be careful about your health pool going into the fight. So until this point, we've gathered a number of levels, and levels in this game increase the health pool by an incremental amount, but it's still enough for it to matter for this kind of boss. So everything we've done up to this point will come down to this final boss engagement with an individual that we may or may not have seen already in this run. I'll just put it that way. But yeah, now we're in Sunken Sanctum. There's no enemies in this area, actually. It's just all hazards. These electrical cubes, they hit you and they send you back a little bit. They're supposed to do damage too, but on the normal difficulty, hazards actually don't even deal damage. So there's no risk of losing your health, but you can lose a lot of time still by getting hit by these cubes. So it's not ideal to get hit by any of them. But the thing that we're going to do before navigating further down into God's Hall, which is beneath, basically it's at the very bottom of Sunken Sanctum, is that we need to get the key to God's Hall, which is located in this little subsection of Sunken Sanctum. So we need to make this detour here, and then we'll go back. We'll go back to the confluence that we tapped from before and head down to God's Hall from there. So yeah, this is the final stretch. As you can see, you could probably guess based on where the timer is right now. Again, this category is very, very fast paced. We're basically, the goal here is to get swim and then just go straight to the end. Unfortunately, we don't know of a way to skip some of these, I guess, sub-quest done along the way, such as the boat ride to get across the misty waters. But as long as we get swim, we don't mind it too much. The runners have optimized the route to getting swim so much since the early days that it's not even that big of a deal. And also, the combat that we're able to achieve with crouch canceling is so much more improved as well, that truly it's a beauty to behold how fast we can complete the run compared to 1 year ago. So yeah, now the grand descent down the elevator, to hype up this final boss fight is made, and equipping the Scorching Judgment, last bit of talent points to also make sure that we have Iron Bastion ready, which is the parry that I mentioned before. And yeah, basically this fight is just going to be crouch cancels some more. I've already mentioned before, but basically even with the scythe, the crouch cancels are still just doing the standing attack into crouch into standing attack. But you got to wait until after the standing attack's active frames connect, right? Notice how the boss for fighting is Guider the Shadow Moon, but doesn't she look familiar? Doesn't she look a little bit like triple question marks from very, very early into the run? Yeah, the very same person, the one and only. But this time she has a phase 2, and this time she also does way more damage. So we have to be a lot more careful. Ideally, you want to do this hitless as with the other bosses, but especially this boss, because this boss will actually one-shot us, even on normal difficulty. In this current position, she will one-shot us, so got to be very careful. Basically, if I feel like I get hit, then I would use the parry, if possible. Sadly, it can only be used on the ground. But yeah, it's the crouch cancel attacks with the scythe. It's still possible to do it pretty quickly, even with the scythe, despite not having as fast of an attack speed or an attack swing as the regular one-handed sword. But with enough practice, it's very, very doable. And there we go. That is the run. Very nicely done fight. No parries were necessary. I'm sorry I didn't get to show it off in this run. But this is a little bit of an older PB, so at the time it was a bit of more of a proof of concept for getting the boat cutscene stuff to be working. But since then, we found the consistent way to get it working. So this run isn't as this run isn't as pertinent nowadays, but it's more of like a historical archive of what we used to do before we found the Ian boat workaround thing. So yeah, this was a 32:21 time. And I hope this overview of the restricted any% was enjoyable to watch or to listen to. Thank you very much for listening.